This is the Benefits Buzz Podcast, your weekly pulse on what's happening in the world of employee benefits. Brought to you by your friends at WEX, who believe in simplifying benefits for everyone. Now listen up and let's get buzzed. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Benefits Buzz. I'm your host, Eric Pilla. I am joined, as always, by my co-host, Kelsey Burgad. Kelsey, we lovingly called this episode when we were prepping the COVID-19 aftermath episode, where we got to look at what we just went through and we figure out what did we learn from it, and more importantly, what does this mean for going back into the office? Those of you who have been watching us this season know we've been staying up in our homes for over a year. We're doing this podcast from our home offices, and we're like getting really excited to potentially go back in the office. And so we want to do an episode just on this, right?
I'm so excited for this episode, mostly because I think the goal is let's not talk about the past. Let's not talk about, how difficult of a year it's been. Let's just focus on the future and what that means for all of those HR teams and organizations who are, going back to work. And I understand that there are many companies across the country who have been back, for a very long time. Not everyone has had the opportunity to work from home like we have, but I'm excited to talk about this topic today.
Yeah, that was a nice air quotes too, by the way. I like that. They're back. And that's the thing. We know everyone's at a different place, but I think there's still tons we can glean from our experience here. And I'm super excited to introduce our guest on the podcast today. It's Melanie Tinto. She's our Chief Human Resources Officer here at WEX. Melanie, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here today with you.
Yes, this is so fun to have you on. We are a large global organization, and so there are tons of complexities that I know are on your plate every day. And I think just so our listeners get to know you a little bit, I'd love to hear about sort of kind of your road to your role there, your career and human resources, and really some of what happens day to day in your job.
Sure, happy to. And so I've been with WEX for 3 years now. And in the role of Chief Human Resources Officer, I'm accountable predominantly for areas such as succession, talent development, leadership development, total reward strategy, including benefits, and several key connections with the rest of our executive team and all of our global employee base around the world. And prior to coming to WEX, I was focused majority of my time in the leadership development, talent, chief learning officer space. I also spent time in and out of the business, such as product strategy, as well as roles in finance and accounting.
Yeah, who knew that pandemic planning would be part of your job title as well? And, I guess that all rolls into it. I love to hear that you've got that great leadership background and organizational development background as well. We love that topic on this podcast too. Well, let's dive into it, right? I know that we've talked about the massive undertaking it was to move organization remotely, and how we did it really. I mean, we don't like to do too much of patting on our back, but I think we were really proud of how our organization handled that. And I think everyone, listening went through their own, found their own successes and their own challenges. And now we find ourselves on the midst of the CDC just kind of saying, hey, if you're vaccinated, you don't need to wear masks, which again, for a lot of us listening, go, okay, does this mean we go back to normal? What do we do? What does this mean for returning back into the office? And so I would love just to talk about a bit when it comes to the decision of bringing everyone back. What goes into that decision, Melanie? What are the influencers? Is it what do the employees want? Is it what's safe for everyone? Are there regulations and things? Just kind of give us a brushstroke of what goes into kind of coming up with that large decision.
Well, you hit the nail on the head when you thought about no one wrote a playbook for this. And so we've been on a journey for the last 12 to 18 months now, trying to figure out what the playbook actually looks like. And it's been a concerted effort with many people. We had a COVID response team internally here at WEX. We were very proud of the fact that we were a fast mover in terms of getting employees back home and working safely. That was the first and foremost area that we thought of is what do we do to protect our employees and their safety? How do we put the employee at the center? And how do we really make sure that not only they're cared for, but their families are cared for as well? You had employees like everyone on the phone who were dealing with childcare issues and now being a teacher at home and really having to balance many different facets of their life. And we literally pivoted, as you know, overnight. So within a 2-week time span, we had our 5,000 plus employees around the world working from home. And thankfully, we had the technology to do that. We are a technology company, and most of our employees already had that capability prior to going into COVID. We hadn't necessarily leveraged that level of flexibility historically, but it certainly put us to the test, and we were able to do that. When I flash forward to where are we today, a lot happens on a daily basis, and I'm constantly on the phone talking with other companies around the globe, really interacting in terms of what are they thinking about doing and benchmarking, how are we considering that, and then what's going to fit best for our employees at WEX. And so while each company has a lot of similarities in terms of the playbook that they could potentially write, the culture and the employee sentiment really drives a lot of the direction that we're heading. And so when you think about last week's announcement, my phone started ringing off the hook when the CDC put out an announcement
I'm sure.
of, no more masks, and everything's back to normal. And then obviously we're still dealing with what's the country by country and state by state regulations as well. And so we're taking a very thoughtful approach to how we do that. First, we have the voice of the employees, which is saying at least at this time, we definitely want a hybrid work environment. Predominantly, there are still employees that want to work from home, and we have to respect that in terms of either they feel more comfortable, they feel more productive, or frankly, they feel more safe, or their employee or their family situation is warranting that they should likely work from home for a period of time. There's still many of our employees that don't have their children back in school full time, or don't necessarily have the resources or the support network that they need to come back to an office, and really snapping that line and having them come back wouldn't be fair. And it wouldn't be part of who our company is from a culture and values perspective. So we're taking that into consideration from the employee at the center. We're also taking into consideration what's the change management that we need to put into place to get people excited to actually come back into the office.
Right.
WEX, as you know, is a highly relationship-oriented culture. And so we want the dynamic of coming back into the office. I think when our employees come back in, they're going to get excited and really understand and realize what we've missed over the past year. When I talked about the change management piece, anything becomes a comfortable area when you've done it for over a year. And you're talking about a whole set of employees that have not worked any differently for the past year. They've become comfortable in their home. They feel productive. They still feel connected to their employees through a variety of different activities that employees around the globe have engaged in. And so we need to think about how do we start to bring people back in a way that's going to be comfortable and fun for them as well. And so you can imagine grand reopenings. You can imagine that we're going to again, meet the needs and do a soft launch in terms of the reopening. And we'll also likely think differently about our space. So I mentioned that I'm also accountable for global real estate development. And so we're trying to figure out, what does that look like? We have amazing facilities around the globe. We need to think about what's going to best fit the needs of our employees. Is that hoteling space where they can drop in? Is it collaboration space? Because that's really a huge benefit of coming back together. Virtual collaboration is great, but there's nothing to be, replaced in terms of getting around a whiteboard and engaging with your team in a very meaningful and impactful way. And so those are the kinds of things that we're thinking about in terms of what's that look like in the future. And we're taking an approach in terms of understanding where our employees are and really thinking about an iterative approach to this. So it's not going to be, we know that we're going to work remote from home forever. We also know that we aren't going to be a full-time in office forever either. It's somewhere in between, but we also want to be thoughtful about that journey in terms of not making rash decisions to get there.
I love that. There's so much to unpack in what you just said. So many different tactical pieces of advice that our other HR pros that are listening can take away and maybe look to implement within their own organization. But I think what I am hearing you say overall is that we're putting the employees first,
yes,
which is so important, especially with the state of mental health across the country, making sure that there's choice. And so can I dig a little bit deeper on that? And I'm curious, I know we've sent out surveys because I've received them and filled them out. How are we going about determining, or how did we go about determining what those different options were? And would you say that our overall view of work from home as WEX as a company has changed?
I'm going to start with the last part of that question first. So I think our philosophy has evolved. We've always had that optionality around the ability to work from home. I think historically we were predominantly in office environment. And part of that was just, again, who we are, our culture, our DNA, how decisions got made, and also even our utilization of technology. We tended to be more of an in-person walk across the hall and talk to our employees. I think what we've learned through COVID is, first of all, we're a more highly inclusive environment around the globe by working in a virtual setting. We do understand that the video can be exhausting for people. And so how do we start being able to balance the in-person and the video as well? And so I think there's been a better appreciation around the fact that you work just as hard, if not harder, when you're at home than you do in the office. And sometimes you even forget to take breaks that are so necessary, back to the mental wellness, well-being and health question. And so when I think about the piece that came up the most, I think the surprise for many people was the myth of, if you're at home, you're just not working as hard, right? That person must not be working as hard because they're not visible in the office. And I think we've proven over the last year that people are as equally or more productive than when they're at home, and they're able to work, live, and thrive because they're able to balance all the needs of themselves, their family, and the goals and objectives that are set forth by the company. And so I'm really proud of that, and proud of the commitment of our employees. I also think, like probably many of your HR leaders that are on the call today, 99.9% of employees want to do a good job. They want to be accountable. They want to know what they need to deliver, and they expect to do that. And no one comes into work saying, I want to do a bad job. Why would we expect anyone to operate differently at home? And so I think it's really become an appreciation of trust and a reinforcement of those values, and the commitment between a manager and the employee around how they engage in dialogue and conversation on that topic of where, when, and how you work. And so when I think about the office of the future for WEX in particular, it's never going to be full-time remote, as I mentioned. It's likely going to be somewhere hybrid. I think that conversation is going to evolve over the next 6 to 12 months, and we'll likely balance into some type of happy medium of in office when it's appropriate, more collaboration in office, and then also some work time that might be at home because it's dedicated think time, quiet time, or the ability to really just focus. I think that'll be what we see in the future for some of our WEXers. But I want to play that out over time and see what we actually evolve to.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's so funny you talked about like even working from home, you kind of get in this groove and you talk about productivity, and like if my Apple Watch didn't tell me it's time to stand up because I haven't been moving around, I would be you just get enthralled, I think, sometime when you're in your home office in your space. And it's funny that you bring that up. And I think there's a lot of things that we've learned. There's a lot of challenges. There's pros and cons, obviously, of working from home. But I think one thing I want to touch on is, and we talked a little bit about this with kind of talent acquisition, right? And talking about working from home. And there are certain challenges that we need to overcome. And there are things that we miss when we're just working in our spaces and not brainstorming and collaborating with individuals. Sometimes it can happen more easily in an office. But when I think about the future of WEX, and I think about the, it feels like this whole, it sounds like very much like we're moving to a hybrid. And I think if you asked, and this is not a scientific poll, but if you ask a lot of people, that just sounds awesome, right? You get the pros of working from home and the pros of working from office and seeing people and getting that social connection. So is that almost a must now? I mean, if you put yourself in the shoes of everyone listening now, like this idea of flexibility and hybrid, this has become a talent recruitment game where flexibility and this hybrid model becomes very important when we go to grow the company and bring on more talent?
I think it's definitely a consideration around the concept of choice. And so when I think about what employers need to focus on, one is the continued re-recruitment of their current employee base. And so how do you make sure that you're highly engaged in the WEX culture and values? How do you make sure that your employees really understand what those career paths and career growth opportunities are within the walls of the company that you're running? And how do you make sure that people want to stay with you for the long term, for the duration? And equally as so, what's the talent market? It's opened up quite substantially as a result of this hybrid work environment. Obviously, there's something to be said for in-person onboarding. There's an opportunity to make connections physically and live with other people, to travel to the other offices, to see colleagues that you're going to be working with. There's a huge accelerator, is what I'll call it, for your onboarding, especially for someone that's new to a company. For others, it's going to be, a lot of optionality around reflecting on what's the type of culture that they want to work in, what's the environment, how does choice play into that? And I do think the talent really is in the driver's seat in terms of that selection process. And so companies really need to think about not just working from home, but the continued engagement of their employees and what that really looks like, and how individuals and employees have pride in the organization that they work in. That's going to be the piece that's really sticky and keeps employees. And if you look at the focus of where engagement is, that sense of belonging, that focus on leadership development, and I can have a career and I can also have a voice at the company I work at, are critically important. Those are going to be table stakes going forward if they haven't been already at the companies that your audience is working at.
I love it. It's so interesting that you use the words re-recruitment, because I often hear it referred to as retention, and I love the different way of thinking about it by calling it re-recruitment, especially because when you're working from home, it is easier sometimes to feel more disconnected from your coworkers. I would love nothing more than to get in a room with my marketing team and do a whiteboard session. I know it's coming sometime in the future, but I loved that re-recruitment because I think it's so important.
And I was just going to add, we know so much more about one another than we did a year ago. We've seen each other's homes now. We've seen their families, their pets. We've seen it all. We've seen the mailman ringing the doorbell. And so I think we have a much more sense of empathy and caring for our employee base than we did prior to COVID in some cases. And so how do we keep that and preserve it? That's going to be a continued piece of that caring and that empathy that's going to continue that re-recruitment.
Absolutely. I've seen Eric's office change over time. I was just telling him when we got on the call today, I'm like, you've got some nice new flowers.
I've got a plant now. Yeah, look at this. It only took a year for me to get something, spruce up the place a little bit.
It is fun, though, to see the personal side of your coworkers, like it or not, sometimes when I see my own kid walk in the background, but it is fun. I want to dig a level deeper, right, to see how we can help those other HR individuals who are listening today. So what do the hybrid options for WEX look like? What are we rolling out as options for our employees?
Well, this is hot off the press because we're still working on finalizing it right now. So no drum roll yet, but we're in the process of finalizing it with our employees. So we're phasing out we're calling it ways of working, and we're thinking about 3 different types of options. There is the full-time in office. There are employees that are clamoring to come back full-time, whether their space at home just is not conducive. They might have, 4 roommates or live in a small apartment in London. They may end up really just needing some quiet time and thought time, or they just want to be back with their coworkers. And so full-time remote is always going to be an option for our employees. And that's the dedicated space. If you think about more of the traditional office, that's certainly going to still exist for us in the future. We also have a large portion of our population that may decide on a hybrid option, which again is partially in the office. It could be majority of your time in the office, with sometimes you're working from home or an alternate location. And so that hybrid really has a broad array of a spectrum of options that could evolve in there. It could evolve in terms of, if you're in Australia, you may be job sharing with someone else. It could mean that you're doing a 4-day, 10 hours a day work week. It could mean that you're working just in alternate locations. And so there's really a wide array of choice in that hybrid model that we need to educate on, both from a manager level and an employee level. But we anticipate that hybrid in the near term likely means more just at home or in office. And likely if you're using more at home than in office, you're probably using our hoteling space, our drop-in space. Okay. And so the last option are for some, which is a full-time work from home option, full-time remote. And that may be for a salesperson that really is on the road a lot. Their home base is their home office. It makes a lot of sense because they're traveling not to have a dedicated space in the office. They certainly could still drop in, but their predominant office is at work from home.
I want to dig even a level deeper because I know this is hot off the press. So if you don't have answers to this yet, I absolutely understand. But because there are so many different options that you all are talking about rolling out to the WEX employee base, how are you going to go about communicating these? I know we've done in my opinion, our HR team has done a fantastic job of communicating throughout the pandemic. I love the emails that are in my inbox showing me exactly what's going on and what we're working on across the globe. But I want to dig in even just one level deeper on how are we planning on communicating these options?
So it's back to that change management strategy. And you're right, we had the COVID newsletter that in the beginning we did on a daily basis. Then we went to a weekly basis, and now we're roughly on a bi-weekly basis. I believe the communications team can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we're still at a 90+% read rate on that from our employee base. So it's
incredible.
A huge followership and readership, which is exciting. There's been, obviously we focus on a variety of topics, whether it's where we are with the status of COVID in the office, what our protocols are, what's the external landscape look like, and then a lot of resources for our employees in terms of ways to keep fit, mental wellness, or just fun stories about their communities and ways of caring for one another, or stories about their pets. And so we have a variety of different topics that are in there that employees have found quite engaging and have given us great feedback on that. The change management plan, as you can imagine, is a very robust plan, and it starts with making sure that every person at every level really understands what the optionality is and is educated on what that could look like for their teams. Not every role has the same level of flexibility. If you're a facilitator, for example, and you have to facilitate in office, if you have a class of, say, 20 people that are in person, that's not going to allow you the same level of flexibility as perhaps someone in operations that might be able to work dedicated from home. Same if you're a technician or you service laptop computers, or you're part of the maintenance crew that's keeping us safe and healthy and clean.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Those have less optionality. And so that's what I mean when you have to work through that with each individual employee. So we'll end up having a playbook that starts to describe those conversations that managers should be having with their employees. We also have a significant amount of supplemental resources that we'll be shipping out to our employees on an as needed basis. So they'll be available to employees, but they really can select and choose what they need to focus on, whether that's how do you maintain an inclusive environment with your employees now that you have some in the office and now that you have some still at home. How do you make sure you maintain that inclusivity? How do you make sure you set realistic goals and objectives so that employees can have a clear understanding of what they need to deliver? How do you make sure that you can have those candid and direct conversations? And then what does remote work look like, and how can a manager best lead that remote team? What do the routines look like? How do they make sure that they're thriving in that environment? And so it's really about a variety of different training and learning resources. It's also, to your point, a significant amount of communications. We plan on saying this message over and over and over again. And again, testing and evolving and improving. So we don't anticipate that whatever we send out day one is going to be perfect. We anticipate that the employees are going to give us feedback, and we're going to continue to evolve that along the way. And then we do test with our vice president population. We make sure that they have an understanding of the rollout strategy and the support needed. And then we also make sure our managers and then our broader total employee base. And so we're taking a multi-tiered approach, as well as those supplemental resources, to really drive home what that optionality looks like. And we also are going to have a Q&A box so that people can submit additional frequently asked questions. We have thought of every question we thought, but we're sure there's thousands that we haven't thought of yet. And so we're going to be opening up a question and answer box as well, so that employees can have a venue to get their questions answered quickly.
Wow, there's so much gold in your response, Melanie. And we'll just go back, and I love this. Is so much good advice in here, just to think through all the things that you've thought through and your team has thought through. I love it. And I love that back to work playbook. And it feels like it's a big lift, right? All those things that are there, but it's all really good stuff for HR pros to think about, the questions that the employees might have, how each individual role might be different based on what they do and the ability to work from remote. So gold, I love it. Maybe to wrap, Melanie, let's talk about, we try to end our episodes, focusing on, if there's this one piece of advice that you could give, kind of a thing. And, maybe it's around culture. I think about like the importance of when someone starts a new job, that organizational socialization that takes place, when they're there and they learn from their colleagues and they have that orientation, or there's the culture to feel like you're part of something larger than yourself and you're moving towards something. With all of this moving back to work potential and the hybrid model, whatever model they might be going to, if you could, what's maybe the one thing that, if you had to give them one piece of advice when thinking through all this, that really should be their North Star, or something that an HR person should always keep in mind when they're kind of coming up with this plan?
There's probably a lot of answers I could give, but the
I know.
the one word that comes to mind when I first think about what you're saying is patience and caring. And when I think about our employee base, there is going to be individuals on a variety of that spectrum, whether they're gung-ho to come back to the office, they're excited about when we can implement the revised CDC guidance. There's other employees that still, again, are not quite ready to emerge on that journey. And we need patience and caring for one another. We also need to trust that everyone's going to do the right thing. And so if you err on the side of trust with your employee base, 9 times out of 10, that's going to serve you as well as those employees best. And then being open to saying you don't have every answer and you're not perfect, but you're going to do as best you can to do right by the company and to do right by the employees. That's most critical. The final piece I would say is, through all of this, the one piece I've personally learned is we spend a lot of time caring for others. We need to make sure that we also pause and care for ourselves, because our resilience and our ability to be there for others is critical. And the only way you can do that is if you really are focused on also taking time for you to rejuvenate and refresh, because otherwise you're not going to be your best self for others. And so my piece of advice for all of the CHROs and all of the benefits leaders and all of the other HR leaders that are listening is, sometimes we forget to put ourselves first. Many times we forget to put ourselves first because we're in this profession because we care about others. We really do need to make sure that we're taking that walk, we're working out, we're spending time with friends, or we're just taking a day or two for a break, just to make sure we are the best and most optimal professionals that we can be.
I mean, talk about the best advice that anyone could ever give. And I just want to say, too, in closing, thank you so much to you, to everyone else on our HR team at WEX, and to all the HR people who are listening right now. I don't think you get enough credit for everything that you've gone through in the last year. I mean, it's been hard on everybody, but the fact, like you just mentioned, that you are going through it at the same time as you're trying to help and support all of the employees and make these key decisions is just incredible. And the fact that, it was hot off the press news, all of these different options that we're giving, it sure doesn't sound like it. It sounds like you have thought about this. And I know you said there's a whole work group, but I mean, so much effort and time and energy put into that. So just thank you so much for everything that you and all those HR pros out there do.
Great. Thanks for including me today. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. Yep. Take care, Melanie. Thank you.
Bye.
WEX is in the business of simplifying benefits for everyone. Now, although we certainly hope our podcast sparks some aha moments, like that was pretty cool, but of course we cannot provide legal, investment, or financial advice. And, well, therefore, nothing shared in this podcast should be interpreted as such. We encourage you to seek out appropriate professional advice regarding your plans. Hey, congratulations! You made it through our disclaimer. Thanks for listening.